July 26, 1990, a murder occurred in East Oakland, California. I was with my friends hanging out at the apartment complex, and I was awaiting for a friend of mine, Randy, to come pick me up to take me home. And as I am in the middle of the street flagging Randy down, a patrol car comes down the avenue. The car stops, the officer gets out, pats me down, places me in the backseat of the patrol car, and immediately drives me to a crime scene. I am met by a army of law enforcement officers. A sergeant comes to the side of the patrol car door, opens it, and his exact words to me was, "Young man, you have a lot of explaining to do about that dead body."
Hey there, it's me, Rainn Wilson, and I want to dig into the human experience. I want to have conversations about a spiritual revolution. Let's get deep with our favorite thinkers, friends, and entertainers about life, meaning, and idiocy. Welcome to the Soul Boom Podcast. So, we're not afraid to get profound, and we're not afraid to have a sense of humor and be a little...
Neither am I.
Irreverent. I know that about you. So just so you know, we can also have a little fun here.
If we don't have fun, then I don't want to be here.
Okay.
If we can't laugh about my nightmare, I don't want to be here.
All right. I love that.
I'm telling you right now, Rainn, it's okay to poke me. No, I'm serious.
Okay.
It's okay to take me to a place where you may think I don't want to go.
Right.
It's okay. I've been there. Just a quick question. Is my forehead too shiny?
Yes, it
All
is. Right. Let's roll. Jerome Dixon, talk us through the story. I mean, there's so many questions I want to ask you. You've been such an inspiration getting to know you. I cannot even possibly remotely imagine the ordeal that you have been through since 1990. But in order to get there, we got to start at the very beginning. Start on that fateful night and tell us what happened.
July 26, 1990, probably about 9:30, 9:45 p.m. A murder occurred in East Oakland, California. And I was with my friends hanging out at the apartment complex, and I was awaiting for a friend of mine, Randy, to come pick me up to take me home. Randy passed by the apartment complex. He didn't see me and my other friends sitting in the parked car. I saw Randy. I jumped out of the car, ran into the middle of the street to flag Randy down, who had not seen me. And as I am in the middle of the street flagging Randy down, a patrol car comes down the avenue. The car stops, the officer gets out, pats me down, places me in the backseat of the patrol car, and immediately drives me to the crime scene, which was probably about a block and a half, 2 blocks away. We drive into the parking lot, and I am met by a army of law enforcement officers. A sergeant comes to the side of the patrol car door, opens it, and his exact words to me was, "Young man, you have a lot of explaining to do about that dead body." I peer over the patrol car hood from the back seat, and you could see that there was a body laying on the ground with a sheet over it and blood running from the side. I don't remember exactly what I said in response to the question the officer asked, but I said something along these lines. "I don't know what you're talking about. I was with my friends right up the street. They are still there. In fact, they're right behind us in the crowd. You could go ask them what I was doing and who I was with." The sergeant replied, "Young man, if that's the game you want to play, so be it." Hours later, I am driven downtown I am met by two plainclothed officers, investigating officers.
How old are you at this point?
I'm 17.
When did they call your parents?
25 hours later. So while I'm in this room, I'm being interrogated about this murder. The first 7 hours of this interrogation, the officers were extremely friendly. Going into that 14th hour, those officers became authoritative, aggressive with their questioning. In the 21st hour, that aggressive, authoritative tone that they had with me was now, this is what they do to little kids like you in prison if you don't tell us what we want to hear. In that 25th hour, I was so gone from the line of questioning that they were asking me, I caved into their demands and signed off on a confession that was false, but this confession alone was used against me, which got me a sentence of 6 years in the California Youth Authority for first-degree murder, 3 counts of robbery, and assault with a deadly weapon. I was sentenced to the California Youth Authority to 6 years for first-degree murder and 3 counts of robbery and assault with a deadly weapon. 6 months into this committed sentence, I was brought back to court. Now I am 18. My 6-year commitment was now vacated, and I was now being tried as an adult. Now in adult court with the same public defender, the public defender says to me, I'm in a whole new ballgame, and I need to give up names and whereabouts of my co-defendants. And if I didn't give up those names, I would go to trial, and based on my confession alone, I would receive the maximum sentence of 50 years to life in prison. Or I can choose a lesser sentence, being from first degree to a second degree murder, and be sentenced to a life sentence of 18 years to life. Choose my form of cancer is what the public defender said. They're telling me one thing and they're telling my parents something else. Me not understanding the laws, being ignorant to the laws and the practices, I chose the latter, to be sentenced to a lesser charge from a first degree to a second degree, and I was sentenced to 18 years to life. I went back to the California Youth Authority, and when I turned 23, I was transferred from the California Youth Authority to the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, i.e. prison. So I was given an indeterminate life sentence. And I sat in prison for a crime I didn't do for 21 and a half years. I also want to add, for those 25 hours that I was kidnapped by law enforcement officers, I was nothing more but an empty shell of a child. When they finally allowed me to call home in that 25th hour, my mother could not recognize my voice, her son's voice. I heard my mother in the background as I called. She said to my sister, Leah, there's somebody on the other line. It says it's Jerome. It's not my Jerome. Find out who this person is. My sister Leah gets the phone. She says, hello, who is this? I said, it's Jerome. They have me downtown for murder.
Fuck. Ugh. Just having all kinds of feelings right now. Tell me, for those of us who don't know, I don't know much about the law or the jail. I got arrested once. We shared this in common. I was 12 years old. I was toilet papering houses and egging houses in Lake Forest Park, Washington. And the LFP PD brought down the heat and called my parents after about 12 minutes. And my dad picked me up. I didn't even really get into trouble. So that's a feeble attempt at humor in the midst of tragedy. But that's what we're about here at Soul Boom. Tell us that first 25 hours What should have happened? What did you learn? That sounds like something that would happen in a military police state, authoritarian police state somewhere without any rule of laws. Talk about Miranda rights, the fact that you should have had a lawyer present, that your parents should have been present. How is it possible that you were interrogated without your parents there at 17 and that the whole thing wasn't thrown out because they weren't there with you? Like, what the fuck went on in that first 25 hours?
For starters, Rainn, that is a damn good question. What should have happened was my parents being notified about my detention immediately.
Yeah, first call.
First call. The second thing that should have happened was that I should have been awarded an attorney or someone in authority to help me understand the meaning of Miranda rights. If those two things alone would have been administered, I would not have been convicted for a crime I didn't do. In the 1990s, Miranda rights, child Miranda rights, was not a topic of conversation. It wasn't a hot button issue. I think we've seen it over the years, the decades, how children have been duped into confessing to crimes that they didn't commit. There's countless stories out there. I don't even need to mention the names.
Now, did they ever find the murder weapon? Did they ever have any clue about who actually did this murder? Because, first of all, just on a common sense level, let's say you killed the guy. So what, you're hiding out in the middle of the street? It doesn't make any sense. Do you know what I mean? That's the last place a murderer would be, is in the middle of the street going hey, Randy.
You're absolutely right. And what about all of my friends who I was with in the parking lot, standing behind me
in
the crowd?
And they wouldn't even interview them.
They wouldn't
even talk to them.
Not at all.
So they had zero interest in finding the truth.
Zero interest.
Just black guy fits the description somehow, conveniently, we'll just hang it on him.
Yes,
100%.
100%.
Mm-hmm.
So sad, but true. That was the reality that I existed in, and that is the reality today. To my knowledge, the murderer, the individuals that did commit this crime have not been found, charged, convicted. Yeah. The time was served.
There was not a single shred of evidence. There wasn't a fingerprint. There wasn't an eyewitness that put you there. There was a story about the eyewitness, right?
The eyewitnesses would not even identify me moments after the murder occurred as I'm sitting in the back of the patrol car.
So they were brought over is this the guy who did it?
Right.
They were like, no.
That's right. You're absolutely correct. In the backseat of the patrol car, moments after the murder occurred, a light was flashed on me. The three remaining victims walked over to the patrol car, and they could not identify me as the shooter or one of the individuals that robbed them that night.
And I'm taking it too, and that's 25 hours when you signed that false confession. You didn't sleep one wink in that time.
Not at all. I went to the bathroom one time. The investigating officers escorted me to the bathroom one time. They brought me a sack lunch, but I did not have any appetite to eat or to drink water. Rainn, I was nothing more but an empty shell of a child.
Yeah. I mean, the you were in that flight, fight, fear, trauma response. Wild animals in the wild, they get in that and they go into literally a coma where they're just shaking, even playing dead, just overwhelmed.
Rainn, watch this. I remember being in that room when the officers would leave. I remember shaking uncontrollably with fear of the unknown. I remember in that 25th hour, the investigating officer, they just continuously said, if you tell us what we want to hear, we'll let you go. And finally, in that 25th hour, I remember I laid my head on the table and I began to cry uncontrollably. I picked my head up and I said, fine, whatever you want to know, I'll tell you. The investigating officer slammed his hands on the table and said, finally, we're going to get somewhere. The truth.
It's torture.
You know, Rainn, just imagine your child in that room for 25 hours. You want your child to be protected. You want your child's rights to be protected. And none of that happened for me. So again, just imagine your child in a setting that I just painted. You don't know how your child would act or respond in a situation like that. All I wanted to do, Rainn, was go home.
Yeah.
I wanted my mom. I kept crying and saying, I want my mom. I want my mom. And they said, we'll give her to you. You could get that call as soon as you tell us what we want to hear. I didn't see my mom until 21 years later.
Yeah. I don't even know how to have this conversation, to be honest with you.
You know, Rainn, for when I walked into prison as a child, I couldn't see the end. I had no end. I had no speck of light at the end of my tunnel. I don't know if you remember the series Buck Rogers.
Yeah.
Okay, Buck Rogers in the 25th century. That was a big...
You're kind of a nerd, aren't you?
You
got a little...
Hey, listen.
You're like a prison nerd.
You know it.
Okay.
You know it.
All right.
And so growing up, we all used to watch Buck Rogers in the 25th century.
Yeah.
And in
Eep-a-deep-a-deep. Hey, Buck.
You got it.
Yeah.
And in the 90s, there was a catchphrase because crime was just so uncontrollable back then. And the catchphrase was, if children are going to be committing crimes like adults, they need to be punished like adults. And so they started giving out Buck Rogers dates. So if you got locked up in the 1990s, the Buck Rogers date that you would receive would be somewhere in the 21st century. Think about it. So I couldn't even see the end at the end of this ordeal that they just, signed off on, this nightmare, this prison sentence. And I remember, walking into prison at a young age, and I was terrified. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. And I remember there was an individual that came up to me on the prison yard. And he said to me, youngster, I don't know how much time you have, but if you want to survive this, there's 3 things that you should do. 1, don't fuck with punks, don't gamble, and don't click up. That's the only 3 things he said to me. He said, if you want to survive this, you do these 3 things, you'll get to the end. I didn't know what that meant then, but going through that nightmare, that whole experience, it made all the sense in the world.
And I want to get to how you survived 21 years in lockup, because that story is pretty damn inspiring. But before we leave this whole mess of that, especially the first 25 hours, but a lot more went down than that. Like, who the hell are these people? Who was the detective? Who was the district attorney? Who are these people not interested remotely in finding justice? Not remotely, just tagging the closest black guy they could find. Like, who are these guys? They must have done this dozens of other times.
I believe that they had a formula to follow in the early 90s. And that formula, again, going back to that catchphrase, if children are going to be committing crimes like adults, we need to punish them like adults. So these individuals, they had a formula. And that formula was, in my opinion, once we get them round up, let's lock them up by any means. Let's lock them up. But whatever the cost is, let's lock them up because we need to protect public interest at all costs.
So this was the beginning of that whole war on drugs thing.
Yes, it was.
Inner city, mass incarceration.
This was the beginning, the birth of that mass incarceration boom.
Yeah.
And I got rounded up and caught up in this net of kids being punished like adults.
How do you feel about those guys? There's a handful, especially of truly like corrupt individuals at the center of this. How do you feel about those guys? You must have a list of names. You know, in Game of Thrones, when what's her name? Sonya, the young Stark. Sansa has that list of names of who she wants to kill, like, and she runs over that list of names. You must have had a list of names of those guys, and maybe even add a judge or two to that list. Like, how do you live with that? I mean, the system is broken. Yes, okay. We can talk about systemic racism and systemic injustice. Yes, and they're a cog in that big giant machine.
Sure.
But they don't have to be a cog. They don't have to. That was their choice. And how do you feel about their individual responsibility in this? Are you able to forgive these guys? Were you ever able to have a conversation, write a letter? How do you process this group of really like heinous assholes that locked up a 17-year-old?
Well, let me start by saying, Rainn, I am a firm believer in the mantra protect and serve. I, believe it or not, I still believe in the mantra of protecting and serving. I also know, I've come to learn that there was a small group of people that had something to do with the injustice that I was served, and they don't represent the masses. Do I have a scroll list of individuals? Absolutely. But should I hold all law enforcement accountable for my injustice? No.
Yeah, but let me push back on that a little bit, because you always hear this and it comes out like there'll be some cop who beat up a kid in the back of his car and turned off his body camera and blah, 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 and he's convicted, and then that happens in Indianapolis, and then it happens in Jacksonville, and then it happens in Atlanta, and then it happens in Seattle, and it's like, oh, it's a bad apple. It's like, oh, that's just one bad apple.
Sure.
Oh, there's a couple bad apples, and the rest of the cops are all good. But like, systemically, we have a system, a justice system, an injustice system that fosters bad apples. There's more bad apples in law enforcement than, and you never hear about that with other occupations.
I agree.
Where are the bad apples who are dentists? We're breeding bad apples, and we can't just dismiss it by saying there was a couple people here and this guy here and this guy over here and this little gang of guys in Baltimore that would beat the shit out of people in the back of police cars. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
absolutely. I can't, go after those individuals and say, you know what, you fucked my life up.
Yeah. That would be
You robbed me.
The Hollywood movie version is you get out of prison and you go after them.
But is that really justice right there? Again, like, after going through all that, people say to me, dude, why aren't you mad? I can't be mad. To be mad, I would not be able to sit on the other side of this microphone and have this conversation with you. There's too much energy that will be lost as a result of me being mad. And I can't be present. If we can go back to the 21 years in prison and what it was like for me, I always paint this picture of a person holding a live grenade. I was holding a live grenade. Inside this live grenade was my 18th birthday, all my milestone birthdays. It was, my nieces and nephews being born, my sisters being married, all the milestone moments that took place in 2 decades was inside this live grenade that I had to hold on to. And this live grenade represented my sanity. And I knew that I've come to learn that the moment that I would let this live grenade go would be the moment that I would explode or implode. It's very difficult trying to hold a live grenade for life for 21 years. But if you could imagine that, what it was like to hold such a destructive device, you would understand what it was like for me to be in that hell of a hole. My sisters would come to visit me 4 times a year, probably 3 hours per visit. So that's 12 hours a year that I saw my family, excluding my mother. And when my sisters came to visit, I had to put on a show to show them that I was handling this nightmare, because to show them that I was being broken in this system would devastate them, and that would ultimately affect their well-being. On the other hand, my mother, she refused to come visit me. Not because she felt or believed that I was guilty. She refused to come because my mother was under the mindset that if her child is innocent and she goes to see her child should be coming home with her. That was a reality that my mother knew was not true, and my mother just could not muster up the courage to come visit me. So it was very difficult for me, but in the interim, my mother and I, we developed a love language. We corresponded, and I would outline my handprint on a blank piece of paper to show my mother how much my hands, my physical demeanor had been progressing and growing over the years. And so I would outline my handprint, and then I would take that piece of paper and hold it up to my chest, and I would hug it, let the paper get real wrinkled up, and I would just shove it in an envelope and mail it off to her. And that was our love language. This is the way that my mother and I communicated over the years. And when I came home, my mother and I, we had a conversation, an in-depth, heartfelt conversation. And it all became clear to me why she took that stance. Now, obviously, Rainn, I couldn't understand that going through that 21-year ordeal. But when I came home, I understood very well. Again, Rainn, put yourself in my mom's position. Think about your child going through that ordeal. Think about you holding that grenade, or your child holding a live grenade. It's very difficult, but it was necessary for my sanity to do so.
You were a runner in prison. Tell us about that.
So I remember those 3 things that the individual came up to me and said if I wanted to survive. Well, I never clicked up. So because I never clicked up, that meant that I couldn't partake in some of the yard functions because I wasn't part of a car or a group or a gang in prison. And so that meant the only neutral zone on the prison yard was the track. And so when they would release us to the yard for program, I would just run. I would run for 4 to 5 hours a day, every single day. That was, my happy place, if you will. And, it was what was interesting is that in retrospect, I remember there would be guards coming out and placing bets on me to see how long I would go, see how long I would last. Because, some institutions, in some California institutions, the weather would be as high as 100 degrees in the summertime. And I would still be running 4 or 5 hours out of the day in 90, 100 degree weather.
What specific prisons were you in?
One specific, I was in Folsom. I was in Sierra Conservation Center, Jamestown. I started in DVI, which is in Tracy. And then the last institution that I was at was the California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo. And, again, the yard was my only happy place. Now, let's back up a little bit too. But before I got to that happy place where I learned how to walk through time, being trapped in time, if you can understand that, I was in a dark place. Remember, I couldn't see the end, the light at the end of my tunnel. And so my first couple years, Rainn, I was in a dark place, a dark cave, where I was trying to process what happened to me. How did I get here? You know, when is this ever going to be over? My belief in God was shattered. I was raised Catholic. And, you know, my mother always instilled in us, you know, the Bible and teachings and rituals, etc. But none of that could apply to me when I was in that nightmare.
Yeah.
I couldn't see myself pleading with God, you know, to get me out of this because...
Was there a kind of a, like, how could you do this to me?
Absolutely.
Kind of thing? Yeah.
I raged a
makes
war.
Sense. Yeah.
I raged a war against my God.
Yeah.
Obviously, he won all the battles, you know, but I raged a war against God. I was like, screw you. I want nothing to do with you, your rituals, none of it. Because what manner of God would put a child through this? And so while in that dark cave, fighting with God, you know, there came a break. A little speck of light at the end of that tunnel. And I acquired insight into my life. And I began to see the person that I was, the true version of myself. And I began to have a conversation, an honest conversation with that 17-year-old kid. And I asked that 17-year-old kid the pertinent question that everybody wanted to ask. Why the fuck did you confess to a crime you didn't do? Why'd you do it? Help me understand this. And as I confronted this 17-year-old child, it all made sense. He spoke to me and he cried uncontrollably. Said, I didn't know what else to do. I was afraid. And I was in a corner. And the only way I thought to get out of that hole, that corner, was to tell them what they wanted to hear. So I did. And me being a man, I confronted that 17-year-old child. And I embraced him. We cried together. And I said, from here on out, I'm going to be your man. And if anybody wants to harm you or talk shit to you, send them to me. And I'll be your protector. Let me give you an example. Rainn, I have a picture of myself as a 6-year-old as a reminder to always protect him. I am his man. And as we began to embark on this path together to that little light, that speck of light at the end of our tunnel, my perspective, our perspective changed. We saw ourselves for who we were. Innocent people, innocent men, innocent child in prison. And we had to forge our way up out of here, one step at a time. We couldn't run to the end. We had to walk slowly to this speck of light at the end of the tunnel. And we did. And as a result of it, I'm sitting right here before you. We are.
You both are.
We both are.
You know, there's a kind of therapy that I've done that does just that. It's called a Gestalt therapy. And the idea is that inside of us is a committee. There's a whole bunch of people in us. There's a wounded toddler. There's an angry 6-year-old. There's a rebellious 13-year-old. There's a lost 17-year-old. There's our addict self. There's our judgmental self. There's who's like the school principal kind of self, you know, that beats ourselves up. There's all these different aspects of us inside of ourselves. And the goal of that kind of therapy is to, which I've done a lot, is you put that person in a chair and you have a conversation, whether it's the 3-year-old, the 6-year-old, it doesn't matter. It's like whatever you were going through, when you had a trauma and you get in a dialogue and then you go sit in the chair and you become that 13-year-old and you have the conversation with the adult and you tell the adult asks questions, 13-year-old answers. You can do it by journaling too. You don't have to do it in like an acting exercise, but it's incredibly powerful, especially, you're interrogating like your addict self or your worst self, your scared self. And it gives you such a great empathy for all of those characters that we all have in our heads. It can be incredibly healing. And it sounds like without even knowing shit about therapy, you undertook this kind of like really proven therapeutic practice and put it to work.
Yeah, but let me also add to that. I had to make myself vulnerable again to self. Because if I was not willing to make myself vulnerable, then I wouldn't have made that breakthrough of, in acquiring that personal insight. And it's very difficult trying to, reliving trauma. It's very difficult going back to when the trauma originated because, time had passed and you've learned how to forget about what had happened. But it wasn't the case for me. I had to go back to where it happened in order to understand my present state.
Yeah.
And as I started to understand my present state, it led me into my future.
And we always, no matter who you are, you don't have to go to prison, but that trauma does have to be unpacked somehow or other. It sucks. It's vulnerable. It's like the last place you feel like you want to go, but
sure,
it's got to get unpacked in order to move forward. I was thinking a little bit about the idea of prisons, and I was talking to my friend on my way here, and we were talking about certain addicts are like ghost ships. Ghost ships, like a ship washes on shore in Japan, and it used to be like a North Korean fishing boat, but all the guys are dead on it, and they don't know how many years or months it was just floating out there, and it just floats in the shore. Just ghost ships, still sailing, still floating around, but just empty. With certain kinds of addiction, you can get by. You can get along in your life and be functional, but there are people that are like ghost ships. That's a kind of a prison. Addiction is a kind of a prison. Mental illness is kind of a prison. Mental health stuff is a prison. Materialism is a prison.
Sure.
Workaholism.
Yep. Marriage. The list goes on and on.
It can be, yeah.
Sure.
All of these things are stuff we can get trapped in. Now, it doesn't hold a candle to actually be behind bars. I'm not trying to say that. But so much of what we talk about on Soul Boom and what so many people are doing some amazing work, what are tools that we can use to get out of whatever prison we're in? So you were in real prison, not pretend prison, not a prison of the mind or a prison of circumstance. You weren't like a victim to your thinking and your behavior.
Sure.
You were an actual victim of the prison criminal justice system and behind bars, 21 years. What tools did you turn to while you're battling with God to stay sane and get by? And because I really am thinking like I could learn from what you had to do to survive.
How often do you look into your own mirror? Every day, every other day, people tend to, I choose not to look into my own mirror when I did something wrong. I don't want to accept that truth. So one of the tools that I had to learn how to accept and use was when I did something wrong, I had to acknowledge it. You can't move forward until you acknowledge that truth. I couldn't have gotten out of my internal cave until I acknowledged my truth, my mistake. And you have to apply that same principle, that same exercise every single day. Every moment that you make a mistake, you have to look in the mirror and say, what did I do wrong? You correct it. There was a couple phrases that I would always utter to myself in prison. Number one is, hey, listen, when you make a mistake, honor it, correct it. That way you won't ever make it again. The second thing is we would always say it's better to be free in the midst of bondage than to be free and bondage to something.
That's exactly what we're talking about here. Yeah.
So as long as I, looked at my, inner self and I acknowledged my mistakes, I'm moving forward. I'm progressing in life. I'm building a true version of myself. And you stand on those principles and you never waver. You continue to build. Just like, people working out who've never had muscles. All of a sudden they work out and they have this routine, this daily routine. You see the progress. Now their bodies are full of muscles you never even knew you had. So as long as you continue to work on your inner self like that, you'll see the progress and other people would see it too. I developed this learned behavior in prison, and that was always check myself. Always check myself. Did you say the right thing? Did you do the right thing? Are you having the right thoughts? Yeah, it's difficult. But in prison, there's only a couple things. You have a daily routine of maybe 4 or 5 things. You get up, go to chow, you go to your work assignment, come back, take a shower, repeat. It's every single day. Nothing changed. Won't change a bit. Even on holidays. You don't even have holidays in prison. So, I had to, again, work on myself every single day. Every single day. There was never a holiday for me in prison. I came home into the free world.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Like, how does that manifest? If you've got to check yourself every day, and every day is that kind of like soul-numbing routine, like how does that transcribe to being out? Do you check how does that trauma manifest itself? Do you got to check yourself? You're married now. Like how do you not just keep yourself behind walls?
Well, it's interesting because, when I came home, I was led to believe that I had to be perfect. I couldn't be mad. I couldn't make mistakes. This is what I was led to believe, which was a lie.
How were you led to believe that?
Well,
was it a lie you told yourself?
It was a lie that I told myself. For example, if after doing 21 years in prison, I came home and the slightest outburst of anger displayed would cause people to say, I knew it. You are a time bomb.
Wow.
You are a violent person.
Yeah.
I knew it. And I grappled with that for a long time.
What incredible pressure that puts on someone to like, I've got to be perfect. I can never react. I can never lose my temper. I can never even get frustrated, slam my hand down on the table. Cause then, prison corrupted me and and I was a violent youth and I haven't, solved these issues, my anger management issues.
That's right. And that was the biggest lie that I told myself.
Yeah.
And I realized I do have a right to be mad. You know what it's like to drive in LA traffic? At the height of commute, which is every day, all day.
All too well, yeah.
I have a right to be mad. I have a right to be mad. But people assume that I don't have, they told me that I don't have a right to be mad. And when I realized that I do have those rights, again, my life, my perception changed. So coming home into this new world with this new reality and new lived experiences, I had to adapt. And adapting was very difficult. It is very difficult because there are some things that I learned in prison that free people have not learned. For example, how do I let some things go? How do I let the fact that law enforcement kept me in a room for 25 hours, pressured me into confessing to a crime I didn't do, which resulted in me doing 21 years? How am I not mad at them? You could be mad, but I can't be mad. And I'm not mad because I've learned to just let it go. Like, I talk with my wife all the time when there's something bothering her or us or whatever the case may be, and we talk about the analogy of the grenade. When they told me to get out of prison, Rainn, I left the grenade at the door.
Mm. Mm.
And I walked away. And this is how I can prove to you that I've walked away, by leaving that grenade at the door. Because look at me. Look where I'm at. I'm able to have a conversation with you. Like I said in the opening, if I was mad, I would not be able to sit here on the other side of this microphone and have this conversation with you. You have to learn how to let go. Don't forget, but learn how to let go. I know that may sound a little bit difficult, but you can let it go.
You know, I have relatives that can't forgive a cousin because the cousin didn't invite them to the one night of the wedding reception and limited it to like 12 people, and they haven't talked to them in 14 years. And they're like, they can't forgive that cousin. They can't let that go. You're talking about forgiving the cops that arrested you?
Nope, not forgiving. Never said forgiving.
All right, well.
I said let go.
All right.
Big difference.
Well, is it though? Because, you know, because let's turn to spiritual virtues. So the forgiveness is something I think that happens between people. Like, I forgive this person who did me wrong. If that person broke the law, that doesn't mean they get off scot-free. They need to suffer the consequences of what they did, but I forgive them. And are you saying that you have not forgiven the officers and the district attorney, but you just simply have allowed yourself to let it go? Is there so there's kind of a differentiation there?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And let me break it down for you. My definition of forgiveness in this situation is I recognize what you did to me. So I'm going to have an extended arm in dealing with you. I'm not forgiving you for what you have done. I'm going to treat you with a long arm. I'm going to communicate with you in other words, you know, what you did to me so many years, 34, 35 years ago, will never happen again. Because I know now, I know how to deal with you and what you did. I know. I haven't forgiven, but I now have the wherewithal to stand up to you. If you put me in a room right now with two investigating officers with regards to a crime that happened, I know how to defend myself. I know my rights. I didn't know that back then. That's the difference from forgiving and forgetting. So I know how to deal with that.
All right. That makes sense.
But everybody is different. You talk about family, give you a perfect example. I had 21 years to work on myself every single day, 24 hours a day. Extremely work on myself. My family did not have those luxuries to work on themselves because they had all these free devices to tap into to avoid dealing with self-truth. So when I came home, just like you mentioned, you had a relative who still has a 14-year grudge. You know, my family, they too had issues that were unresolved 20-some years ago. And when I came home, they wanted to impress those same unresolved issues upon me. Well, why do I have to have that same belief system that you have? We're not the same. With that being said, I also learned that when I came home, understand when I say this, I was the only sane person in an insane asylum.
Damn.
And so I had to walk a fine line in this insane asylum. Not to do so, I would become insane like everybody else. What am I saying? Look, I learned my self-truth. And I could have came home and denied that self-truth and became insane like everybody else, dealing with those unresolved issues. I can't do that. That's the learned
you came into
behavior.
a ton of family dysfunction.
Absolutely.
You know, resentments, backbiting.
Sure. Look, when I left, I was 17 years old, a child. And I came home when I was 38. I'm 50. I'll be 51. And so, this void in my life, when I came home, I still had that 17-year-old mindset. Just to put it in perspective, Rainn, when I came home, I didn't have a girlfriend. I wasn't dating prior to being locked up. And I came home and I had to learn how to date. Went to the movies with a girl. I'm saying to myself at 38, 39 years of age, oh, is this this time where I'm supposed to grab her hand? Am I supposed to make the move? I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
When I met my wife, I was using terms like puppy love. She thought I was crazy. Like, dude, what's wrong with you? Nobody uses those terms anymore, puppy love. But it was the truth. That was my truth. I was growing into this mature physical man.
Yeah.
I looked like a 38-year-old. Well, I don't look like I'm 50, but
No,
I'm
you
just
don't.
saying.
You don't. Black don't crack. So,
I have some truth serum if you want to buy some of this truth serum, and you know what I mean? I could show you how to be youthful, man. But
okay. All right.
just do a little prison time and it'll preserve you. And
Damn.
But no, seriously, so I had to, accept this new reality, and I had to pace myself in this new world with my sane way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And not to do so, I would become caught up in this insane reality, logic, backbiting, etc. And I just couldn't do that. I can't do that because I learned so much about myself. And so again, we go back to the tools. What tools did I learn while I was in prison to help me become this person that I am today? Again, is going back to self-truth, identifying those issues in your life and making yourself vulnerable. It's okay to be vulnerable to self. Why lie to self? Lying to self, where's it going to get you? And that afforded me with the opportunity to really appreciate life and where I'm at, which is why I can't be mad at something that happened so many years ago. Being mad right now, I would deny myself these self-truths that I'm experiencing right now.
Yeah.
And this is what life is about for me, is being present in the moment. I can't do anything about my past, what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the top 5 spiritual lessons of all time. We can't do anything about the past. We can learn from it, but which you've done. But, they say resentment is like drinking a poison, waiting for the other person to die.
So true.
And what's your relationship with God like now?
It's still estranged. I'm still battling with God. Do I believe that there is a power greater than man out there? Absolutely. But as far as practicing principles and rituals, I have a problem with that. I don't believe that.
So you don't pray?
No, my form of prayer is looking in my mirror and acknowledging, my flaws and building on them. That's my form of prayer.
Mm-hmm. Making yourself a better person.
Making myself
one
a
day
better
at a time.
person,
Yeah.
one day at a time.
Mm-hmm.
That's my form of prayer.
Mm-hmm.
I say that with conviction, and I do that every single day. Sun up, sun down. I'm not saying that I'm perfect. What I'm saying is that my form of prayer is acknowledging my insecurities, my flaws, and making them stronger.
Do you meditate?
Absolutely. I meditate. Meditating is definitely an intricate part of my life. Sometimes I'll put headphones on and I won't even turn the music on or anything. I'll just have them in. People would think that I'm listening to something, but I'm really meditating.
Being married to Braha, I could completely relate.
That's, Spitfire. That's my little Spitfire. And, sometimes I love my wife, but sometimes I have learned to tune her out, because you have to have some me time.
Yeah.
And meditating, is, again, it's an intricate part of my daily rituals.
You still run?
Absolutely. I'm getting ready to run my 9th marathon on St. Patrick's Day.
And you coach specifically maybe youths that are dealing with the criminal justice system. Maybe they're going in, maybe they're coming out.
Correct.
And you work real hard with the Anti-Recidivism League Union. What's it called?
The Anti-Recidivism Coalition.
Coalition. What does anti-recidivism mean?
Anti-recidivism means against the revolving justice system door.
Yeah.
So in other words, we want to stop individuals from getting out and going back into the system.
Which is such a common problem.
Correct.
They go back out into a toxic home, work environment, economic environment with systemic racist issues in the criminal justice system, and a year or 2 or 3 later, they're just right back behind bars.
Correct. With no hope, with no opportunities, etc. And so I am vice chairman of the board for the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, and we do a lot of policy work. We do a lot of advocacy work. Just to put it in perspective, 5 or 6 years ago, we presented 13 bills for lawmakers to sign into law. And out of those 13 bills, we got 11 of them signed into law. One of those bills in particular I am most proud about, and that is the Juvenile Miranda Right Bill, Senate Bill 203. It was signed off by then Jerry Brown in 2017, protecting children 16 years and under. And so what the bill said was that anytime a child was in a custodial situation where they will be interrogated, an attorney will be present and explain line by line what their rights are. If that bill would have been in effect 30-some years ago, obviously my situation would have turned out dramatically different. So I was super excited when Jerry Brown signed that bill into law protecting children 16 years and under. Fast forward, we thought that 16 years was not the appropriate age. It should be at least 18 and under.
Yeah.
So we went back to the state capitol and pushed for amendment of that bill, Senate Bill 203, and it became Senate Bill 395. I'll get,
Did you get the Miranda rights read to you?
My Miranda rights were not read to me. They were read to me in the 25th hour.
Right.
That's when my Miranda rights were finally administered
Right.
to
So
me.
you didn't know that you were entitled to
Not
a
at all.
lawyer and that what you said could be held against you.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And so now Governor Newsom is in office with this new amended package bill, and he signed off on it. Now, there's a funny story. This was in 2021. I think this was right around where COVID, COVID was in place. And this is when Zoom became so popular and everything. And so as the governor was signing off on this amended bill, they contacted me for the bill signing. And Governor Newsom had gave me a call. And when the call came in on my cell, it was from an unknown number. So I didn't pick up. And then the Zoom call happened, and then a couple minutes later, Governor Newsom came into the frame. And, he talks with this raspy voice, "Jerome, my man, I just gave you a call, but you didn't pick my call up." And I said, "What?" I said, "Well, Governor, I'm sorry. I guess this is a good opportunity for me to talk about, robocalls, because I thought it was a robocall, and I don't pick robocalls up." And so I said, maybe this would be a good opportunity for you to sign off on robocalls. You know what I mean? And then, but there's a very interesting point that he made before he signed the bill. He said to me, "Jerome, if this bill would have been in effect when you were going through your ordeal, you probably would have been spared. So I'm signing this bill for you." That made my day. Hearing those words from Governor Newsom, signing off on this bill. And not only that, but it allowed me to see how I had come full circle. Because now I am the poster child for juvenile Miranda rights, which brings me to this point, good segue, which is what I'm doing now. California was the first to sign off on this juvenile Miranda right bill package. And so now I am spearheading the charge to get this juvenile Miranda right bill package federalized so that it applies in every single state and not just in California.
Yeah.
Look, Rainn, what happened to me, it was not just a California issue.
No.
This is happening in every single state. I am not a unicorn. There are many young men and women that are being duped into signing off on confessions that, that are not true, which result in them being sentenced to crimes they did not do. And that's what I'm about. Standing for the people, the individuals, the young people that do not have voices. I am their voice standing on a mountaintop, trying to get legislation to protect them from here on out.
Amazing. Beautiful stuff. And tell me about your coaching that you're doing.
So I coach young people, young men and women who are either getting ready to go into the system, who are in the system, and who are possibly getting ready to come out of the system. And so my standpoint is, you know what? You can go through the system and still be successful. You can go through
sane.
And sane.
And wise.
And wise. And you don't have to harbor, what happened to you in the past, which will stifle your present. And so I'm a living example. I'm presenting them with lived experiences to help them navigate through this ordeal.
Yeah. And how can people find you? Online?
You could either find me through the Anti-Recidivism Coalition portal and just, type in Jerome Dixon. It would also link you to my website, which is 21V, which will give you a clear picture of what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. 21V stands for the 21 and a half years that I spent while incarcerated.
If you're in the United States and want to be part of the change that Jerome is talking about on a national level, contact your representative or senator and tell them to support the Protecting Miranda Rights for Kids Act, which would require police to notify and contact parents or guardians if their child is arrested or detained. Get involved with the work, antirecidivism.org. And if you want to help Jerome in his effort to achieve a full exoneration, you can write to my friend, Governor Gavin Newsom. Email pardons@gov.ca.gov. And be sure to put Jerome Dixon's name in the subject line. Tell us about the full exoneration that you're seeking.
I want to be made whole. And being made whole means to absolve the injustice that I was served. It took moments to find me guilty and to convict me, and it's taken me years to get that conviction overturned, resolved. And it shouldn't be that way.
No.
And so I'm on an additional plight to get my name cleared and to be made whole again.
Right on. Your story is devastating and moving and inspiring, and people need to hear it. And like you said, there's thousands of young men just like you suffering in the same way right now as we speak. And, I can't thank you enough for sharing your story and for the work that you're doing. And it's been truly moving. And I'm so happy that more people are going to hear what you're about and also get to grow and heal from the wisdom that you gained.
Thank you, Rainn. I appreciate you having me, and I now have a friend for life.
The Soul Boom Podcast. Subscribe now on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever else you get your stupid podcasts.